Police in Brussels arrested Dr. Callum Miller's wife for merely holding a sign reading, quote, "Children are never born in the wrong body," and arrested her for engaging in public conversations about gender. Billboard Chris, a well-known critic of gender ideology and a friend of the program, reported he too was threatened with arrest unless he put his signs away. Dr. Miller now can't reach his wife and is urging the public to share their story. The incident highlights a growing trend in Europe where peaceful speech on controversial topics are being criminalized, raising very serious questions about the future of free expression on the continent. Our next guest is Hermann Kelly, founder of the Irish Freedom Party. Hermann, how serious is this crackdown, and what does this story illustrate to you?
Oh, it's very serious in Brussels. Ireland has just been threatened by the European Union that it must impose anti-free speech legislation because Ireland is the kind of headquarters of so many of the large American tech firms. But on Billboard Chris, his surname is Elston. I met him on Wednesday in the European Parliament. He told me that Brussels itself was the worst city that it had ever been in, when all he does is go around with a billboard that the children cannot be born in the wrong body, or that children cannot consent to puberty blockers. The kind of basic point of law, I suppose. But he says that Brussels itself was the worst city that he'd been in for aggression, for threats. And basically what happened is that on Thursday, he went into the centre of Brussels, a lawyer, Lois McClatchy Miller, who you mentioned. They were both there with their billboards, and they were surrounded by 20 people. There was threats of violence. They called the police, and instead of the police turning up and saying, "Oh, sorry about this, we'll disperse this mob of violent thugs, so you can present peacefully your message," and all they were doing was having conversations with people. The police instead turned round and they said, "You better shut up, move, or we're going to..." What happened was 14 police turned up. They confiscated these billboards and told Chris and Lois they took them to the police station, stripped them down to their underwear, removed their billboards, and threatened them with arrest. Now, eventually, they backed down because Lois is from ADF International, is a lawyer, and obviously there was a counter threat, but they allowed them off without any charge. But it's very clear that the Brussels authorities wanted to suppress free speech entirely. And you know what? It's not what they're saying is even controversial. They're standing up for basic biology, that biology is more important than trans ideology, and also that children are not old enough to consent to large changes and large decisions, which the end point of this trans ideology, that children can and are being mutilated, and these puberty blockers end up with lifelong sterility. Which parent would want that for their children?
Now, you know, and I know Chris, for Chris to say that Brussels was the worst experience and the worst place that he has been to, doing the things that he has done, that's pretty serious. But what strikes me is that, no, these aren't singular incidences between police and protesters. Like you mentioned earlier, you have the EU threatening Ireland. Talk to us, expand on that. What are they threatening Ireland with exactly, and do they actually have the authority to carry it through if it gets to that?
The thing is that Ireland is the headquarter of many large American tech firms, be it Facebook, Google, Twitter, etc. They're headquartered in Ireland, so it's Irish law, or transposed from the EU, is basically will be the judge and executioner of matters that come to free expression on the social media. And the EU, now there was our party, the Irish Freedom Party, has caused quite a rumpus in Ireland because we've had rallies with other groups against the suppression of free speech. I think we were at least partially successful. The government threatened to impose anti-free speech legislation last year before the election. I think because there was such a public kickback that they decided, no, we better not. Uh, but the EU has now come in, and remember that this anti-free speech legislation originally came from an EU framework. So the EU is like the graveyard
Right.
for national democracy. It's also the graveyard for free speech. And they are trying to impose through what they call the Digital Services Act, that's legislation where they try to constrict freedom of speech on social media. Now, over the last number of years, nationalist, populist parties have increased their vote. All these federalist fanatic groups and the EU centralizing parties are being squeezed, and they're counter to that. Instead of trying to follow public opinion, is instead to suppress free speech, and they're trying to do it mainly through the EU's Digital Service Act by constraining free speech on social media. So the EU is
And
where America is standing up for free speech, EU is trying to suppress it. And one of the good things, or the good outcomes of Billboard Chris being arrested in Brussels, is that the United States government has taken a very sharp interest in this case and is looking into the matter. And now even the Department of State had made comments about it, that the free speech is like
yes.
being put in a cage in Brussels.
There's growing resentment among Irish citizens toward economic migrants and perceived fake asylum seekers.
Yes.
That is intensifying amid a deepening housing crisis, with many believing that newly arrived migrants are prioritized for housing and resources while native Irish, particularly the homeless, are left behind. How rampant is asylum fraud in Ireland right now?
It's absolutely through the roof. And as you said there, the priority seems to be given to these people, economic migrants coming into Ireland. For example, let's take refugees from Ukraine. They can come in, they get free accommodation, free welfare, free education for their kids, free medical care. And yet, if you're an Irish citizen, you have to be assessed. There's a means test for Irish people, but if you say asylum seeker or refugee, you get everything automatically for free. And I was just in Cork in the very south of Ireland. There on Saturday, there's a very large rally, possibly up to 20,000 people. And it's the main driver of economic migration into Ireland is actually legal migration from EU open borders and the huge number of work permits. I believe America has 65,000 work permits for huge population. Ireland has 40,000 permits for like a small population of over 5 million people. And there's only about 20,
Yeah.
between 20 and 30,000 to asylum seekers. But the main driver is EU open borders and work permits. It's costing us a huge amount of money. Demand is driving up prices of houses, and young people, Irish people, cannot afford a house, and they're emigrating in droves to Australia and Canada, etc. And it's very damaging to both the security and economic prosperity of the Irish people in Ireland.
No doubt. And we'll be tracking this story because, again, it's the parallels are eerie. I know that people in New York, for example, probably resonate deeply with what's happening in Ireland. But it's not an unknown pattern of behavior, and it's brought on by policy from the top. Hermann Kelly, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you, Chanel. A real pleasure. Thank you.